So within Expert Agent, there are multiple ways of adding properties into the system. You can add a property via the properties dashboard, grid, the properties drop-down menu as well, from a landlord record, from an applicant, from an appointment, from a tenancy, and from a maintenance job. So a huge amount of places that you can add a property into the system. Regardless of where you start, you will always be directed to the Add Property wizard. So hovering over properties in the top menu and selecting Add a New Property from the drop-down, and that takes us through to the Property wizard. Now within the training account, the first change we need to make is to change the department here to Lettings. That will change the vendor details in the middle here to Landlord details, and I'll explain that in a little bit. If you have multiple lettings departments, then you need to make sure that you are adding this property into the correct one. And if you're in your own line data, if you are mainly lettings or lettings only, your department may be defaulted to be lettings. The next step is to add in the postcode for the property. Selecting the option from the drop-down menu, and then adding in the inquiry source and the inquiry method. Now we can start adding in landlord details. Now if your landlord already exists in the system, because you can add a landlord independently of a property, and you would do that if your landlord had multiple properties. So you could do that from the landlord's drop down. But if your landlord was already in the system, you would search for them in here. They're not in the system, so we can go ahead and add them in. If they are in the system, do not add them into these boxes. Clicking the search function will bring up the landlord. You click onto it and it will add it into those fields for you. If you add them in again, you will duplicate the landlord record and will not know which landlord to assign rents to and which landlord to assign to the properties and so on. So we're just going to add in the landlord details here. Salutation field, very important for emails and letters, and for the tenancy agreements as well. Email account, mobile number, mobile description, home and work phone. Now our landlords generally live at different addresses to the properties that they are renting out, in which case you would click on this tick box here and do a postcode lookup for your landlords. Selecting the option from the drop down, and that fills those boxes in there. At this point you can add a second landlord if you need to as well, and this will create an individual second landlord record. It will not add this landlord onto the same landlord form as Miss Nope here. It will just add the landlord in as a separate landlord but assign it to the property at the same time. You can add 2 in the property wizard, 2 landlords, and you can add as many landlords as you need to on the actual property record itself. Again, you can search for any existing landlords or add in any new ones in the boxes below. Clicking next down at the bottom or the features tab up along the top will take you through to the second page of the property wizard. Now we've got the status of the property. Now at this point maybe you might be adding in an existing property, in which case we're just going to set the status here to available to let. Now these statuses will be different to any sales properties that you may be adding in. The property type, property style, property age, and property location. Type, style, ages and locations are all set in your configuration. Here we've got the monthly rental of, we've also got weekly and annual. Now when you add your applicants in, I'll explain this in a little bit more in just a minute, but when you add your applicants in, you don't set the rental frequency on the applicant record. The rental frequency gets picked up from the property record. So we're going to add the rental of the property in and select features 2 if necessary. Now property features 2 are also called the essentials 2, and they are set in the training account as the essentials for lettings. You do have the option of having 2 different lists, essentials 1 and essentials 2, and they are things that are deemed absolutely essential for the applicant. So if an applicant has a pet, they will only be able to get matched out to properties that are suitable for pets. You may not be using them in your own live data, and you may not be using them, or you may be using them completely differently. Okay. If you are only lettings, you may be using Essentials 1 for lettings. The general rule of thumb with Essentials is you click as many as possible on a property record and as few as possible on an applicant record. So this property is suitable for pets, it's suitable for children, it's got a garden and parking. Scrolling down, it's also suitable for short and long-term let and suitable for working from the property. The property has got 3 bedrooms, 2 reception rooms and 2 bathrooms. The tenure on the property is freehold. We do not show the size of the property, so I don't need to input that in here. This is a number field though. Over on the right hand side here we have got example of our extra data questions set in the training account on the lettings department. Now you can have up to 50 different questions per department to help qualify your properties and ask the questions with regards to your properties that you need to for your business. So these are just examples. We've got the general condition here of good. We've got the same question here but as a text box just to show you the difference, and then 2 date fields for last inspection and EPC expiry. Next, down at the bottom, or adverts and notes up at the top, you can start adding in any internal notes, advice to client or important status notes, or over on the right hand side any adverts, SMS advert or the main advert text if needed. Now if this was a new property you wouldn't know all of this information, you wouldn't know a lot of information on the features tab either. As long as you have an address and a landlord you can save the property record and fill in the rest of the information later on. Otherwise, we're just going to be pressing the save button here, and what that will do is create the landlord record and the property record and take me to the property record. Now going through the tabs on the property record that we have received to accommodate lettings, the first tab here is the landlords tab. Now on the sales property, this tab will have the vendors listed but in text boxes. On the landlords tab on a lettings property, they are listed but in a mini grid. So clicking down at the bottom on add a landlord, we can add a new landlord in from here. So clicking add a landlord, and then we can go to the landlord wizard from here as well. So clicking on the plus icon down at the bottom will take me through to the landlord wizard, which of course I can get to from the landlord dashboard, grid and drop down as well. So we're going to very quickly fill this landlord record in. We could have, of course, added this landlord in and the wizard on the property wizard when we were adding the property in. Company name if needed, email address, mobile number, mobile description, home and work phone. We're going to do the address as well, so look up the address for the landlord, and then the landlord type and the landlord status, and those are example of our landlord status prompts that we've got set in the lettings department on the training account. These are just you get up to 5 different questions per department to help, or per lettings department to help qualify your landlords, and those are added in your configuration. We've got the standard inquiry source at this point and the inquiry method, and we can press the save button, which will create that landlord record. Now as we can see at the moment we've got a 100% split going to Leslie and 0 going to Ben. We can change that to 50-50 if necessary. Just making sure that the split does equal 100% and then pressing the save button. What we can also do is change the main landlord records here as well. So we could switch them round to say that Ben was the main landlord. If that was the case, we would need to manipulate this box down at the bottom so that Ben was first. Otherwise we can leave it as it is, and from here we can open our landlord records and input any of the other information that we need to, like for example their financial details. Now whilst we're on the landlord record, their financial details can get added in from here and pulled onto the property record, or they can be added onto the property record. The reason they may be added onto the property record is because your landlord has multiple properties and each property has their own bank account. Otherwise, you would add the financial details onto the landlord record and pull it through onto each of the properties that they own. So payment type here and payment reference if needed. The BDC number and amount to retain are legacy fields. The amount to retain is no longer used from here and the BDC number is no longer needed. So you can ignore those. National insurance number, account number, sort code, and then do a bank account lookup. Now those will cost you 10p a go. They are purchased in bundles like text credits. Purchasing those will give you the ability to look up the bank details for the landlord and place the information of the head office in the bank in the boxes below. I am actually just going to type this information in. And then do an address lookup on the bank. We've also got BIC and SWIFT codes and IBANs if needed down at the bottom. Those are generally used for non-residential landlords, but you do have them if you wanted to. And speaking of non-resident landlords, if this landlord is a non-resident, we can click on the non-resident landlord tick box and fill these boxes in. Now do be careful about ticking on that box, because if you do and you didn't mean to, the only way you can untick that box is by right-clicking and using the revert option, or using the revert option from here, and that will revert it to the last save, which would have been when you'd added the landlord in. So all of this information that we'd added on this screen will go. I, however, did save it beforehand, so I am just going to press the revert button. Solicitor and accountant is just a case of assigning contracts like any contacts like any other record within the system. Click the plus icon and search for your contact. You could also add a new one down at the bottom if necessary. And do the same with accountant. Your preferred contractors are on the landlord record, but you can also have preferred contractors on the property, which we'll get to in just a minute. Clicking add a new preferred contractor, this will come into play when we add in maintenance jobs. Clicking on the type and selecting the type from the drop down, and then selecting the plus icon for the contact details. Searching for your plumber and selecting your plumber from the list. Notes then why they are the preferred contractor. They've done work on the property before, or it's the brother-in-law or a friend. They prefer to use them where possible. Clicking on save will add them into the list of preferred contractors on the landlord record. If we go to the properties tab now, the property that we added in is listed here, but we can also add new properties, and that would be assigning them to any properties that we've already got in the system, or creating a new property and going through to the property wizard. The recurring invoices and statements are for lettings finance, and then the events tab with everything that we've done for this landlord record. So closing down the landlord and going back to the property. Moving on to the Access tab here. Now on the Access tab, we can start adding in viewing arrangements, any occupier notes, especially if the property is occupied by somebody that is not one of our tenants. We can add that information in here. We've also got the occupier details down at the bottom. We can add in keys as well, and once we've added in keys, we may want to add in multiple sets of keys, in which case we can then reserve or loan keys. It will ask us which key that we want to reserve or loan, which set, and we can also then attach contractors onto that reservation or the loan as well. Moving past a lot of these tabs here and going to the Dates tab on the property. On the Dates tab, all of these date fields are essentially compliant. You cannot change the date fields without it being noted on the Events tab, which is why they're all greyed out. You need to click on the calendar icon, and I'm clicking on the calendar icon here for gas safety expiry. I'm going to change the date for gas safety expiry and then put in notes regarding that. So changing the date in line with when the actual expiry or the gas safety does actually expire. We're going to come back to this later on when we look at safety checks. Adding in the electrical safety expiry as well, and again some notes regarding that. Now if I go to the Events tab, you'll see that those two logs there saying that I have changed the date, what it was originally, who changed it, and any notes there. On the Utilities tab of the property, we can now start adding in utility providers. These will pull through onto the tenancy once we've created that. So clicking Add a New Utility Provider, clicking the plus icon, the drop-down list here and selecting the utility type, then clicking the plus icon and searching for your gas man. We can put in the account number at this point and the meter serial number, and later on during the tenancy process we can take the meter readings. Any notes there regarding where the meter is located, and then save, and they will go onto the property record. The Maintenance tab is next, where we can start adding in preferred contractors for the property record. So clicking Add a New Preferred Contractor, selecting the type, clicking the plus icon and searching for your plumber that is the preferred contractor for the property. It may be the same contractor. In the notes there, let's say this guy lives next door to the property, he's done a lot of work on it before, he knows the history, so please use him on this property where possible. We can also start adding in maintenance jobs on this property record as well, but we'll do that later on. On the Tenancies tab, we can create a pending tenancy ready and waiting for an applicant to be involved with, but also any previous, existing or new tenancies will be sitting here as well. We're going to look at tenancies in just a bit. Financial details for the property can get copied, as I've said already, from the landlord record, or you can add them in if they are different on this property to the landlord. But I'm going to click Copy from Landlord, and that's pulled through the information. We can add in the contact there as well. And then over in the right hand side here we can add in the amount to retain. Now that does not mean I'm going to be taking £100 out each month. It means I'll take £100 out for the first month and use that as a maintenance retention fund. Payment day, payment type, and the payment reference when we pay the rent to the landlord from this property. Guaranteed rent is for lettings finance. You've got the standard notes box on a property record, and then finally the Events tab. A quick right click and save. We've added in a property to landlords and configured the landlord separately as well.